Hello friends, in this video we'll look at the sociological dimensions of the ongoing protests in Sri Lanka. You already know that the protests in Sri Lanka has been escalating, and it has reached a stage where the protesters have stormed the president's residence. So they have actually overtaken the president's residence, and the president has left his palace now. Again, there is another dimension that Sanat Jasuria, the ex leading cricketer of Sri Lanka, he has joined the protest, and as a result of these protests, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe, he has announced his retirement. This is the brief about the ongoing state of affairs in Sri Lanka. Let us now look at it sociologically. So it is a form of protest, right? What is a protest? There is a lot of confusion about protest and social movement. How does the involvement of an elite or a famous personality like Sanat Jasuria decide the course of action and the trajectory of a protest? We will look into all those aspects in this video. Let's take a scenario that a bus has run over a child and people gather and protest against the incident. This is example of protest, right? It cannot be called a social movement. Why it cannot be called a social movement, we will discuss in a short while. Again, in your syllabus you will come across terms like collective action, protest, agitation, social movement, etc. Protest, it is the most visible form of collective action. There could be different forms like agitation, social movement, etc., but protest is the most visible form. Again, there could be a scenario wherein protest is a part of a social movement. So suppose this is the social movement. It can be accommodating incidents of protest. For example, protest 1, protest 2, protest 3, like that. As an example, our national movement, the freedom movement, was a kind of social movement also, and it included different forms of protest. Or let's take a even smaller example. For example, the Swadeshi movement, it was a social movement and it included different forms of protest. For example, burning of foreign clothes, vandalizing liquor shops, a boycott of schools and colleges. They were all different forms of protest. These protests were a part of a larger movement called the Swadeshi movement. So I hope this example clarifies the distinction between protest and social movement. Again, let's take this example. There could be a protest against COVID-19 vaccine in many countries. It might not actually be a social movement, but it can be isolated forms of protest wherein a group of people come together and protest against certain provisions. Another dimension of the relation between protest and social movement is a movement might start from a phase of mass mobilization and collective protest, and later it might become more institutionalized, and later it may take the form of a social movement. So suppose let's take this example against COVID vaccine, and if it forms an institutional nature, it gets leadership, etc., then it might sustain over a longer period of time, and it might take the form of a social movement. So the relationship between protest and social movement is I hope it is clear through these two examples. Now coming to how protest is different from social movement. So social movement, it is sustained in nature, it is organized, it has a leadership, it has a structure, it has shared objectives and shared ideology. Why sustained nature? So a protest, it might last for a smaller amount of time. For example, the recent protest in India against the Agniveer recruitment in armed forces. So it was short lived for a few days and then it died down. So it cannot be called a social movement, it is a protest. Organization, so and leadership, they are related kind of, right? So there is a leader to a social movement, and whereas a protest might not have leader. For example, the case of Sanat Jasuria that we have discussed here. So he has just joined the protest, and if he is elected to lead this protest and an organization develops, then this protest might become a social movement. So similarly, all the or a majority of the members of social movement, they shared the objectives and ideology. So it is like a common, it's not like there are different subgroups within a social movement, and each group has, or each individual has his or her own objective or ideology, not like that. So coming to more details about protest, we will now talk about sociology here. So a protest is a form of social expression that seeks to bring about social or political change by influencing the knowledge, attitudes and behavior of the public or policies. So in the case of Sri Lanka, it is a social expression. It aims to bring about political change. That is why we discussed that the PM has resigned. So we can say that the protest, though partially, so it was successful. So it is able to bring about that political change. In talking about the history of protest in terms of its relation and appreciation by sociologists, earlier the sociologists considered protest to be an undemocratic intrusion into politics, but 1960s, when the developed countries, primarily America and Europe, they witnessed a lot of protest, and it changed the attitude of sociologists towards protest, and they started considering it adjunct to democratic polity. As you might already be aware that a protest play an important role in transition from authoritarian to democratic regimes that you have seen in Libya and all. So it led to the ouster of authoritarian regimes, and democratic regimes were installed in place of authoritarian regimes. Again, coming to the next point, So those participating in the protest, so why would people participate in a protest? The reasons can be both individual or collective, but mostly it is collective incentive. So or the majority of the participants, they are participating in the protest for some incentive or long-term benefit or improvement in their socio-economic and political condition. So the protest, the functions of protest in terms of sociology, they perform a lot of functions in a democracy. For example, participation and expression of the individuals, because as you know, democracy is about 3P: participation, promotion, and protection. So you can try and make a mental exercise about how protests promote these 3Ps. So not just that, protests are also an agent of social change. For example, the protest against liquor consumption in a certain village, or a protest against country made liquor that might lead to huge tragedies and all. So they are agent of social change, because the incidents of violence against women by their drunken husbands might decrease if these protests are successful. So they are an engine of social change. Next is a very important point. So communication is very central to the success of a protest, because the communication helps in the mobilizing the people, the resources, coordination, identity formation, information exchange, etc. That is why you might come across news of ban of internet services whenever there is a protest. Same thing happened in the wake of recent Agniveer protest. So since communication is central to the success of a protest, that is why uh, the government suspends the internet services, because internet is a prime mode of communication these days. So this was a quick look into the sociological dimensions of the ongoing protests in Sri Lanka. So I hope whenever you get a question on a protest or the difference between protest and social movement, you would be able to comfortably attempt it. So you can download this slide from the link given in the description below. So also we have mentioned the link to our website reliableandvalid.com in the description. Please do pay a visit. Thank you so much.